Welcome to my review for Syndicate on PS3, the, I guess, series reboot, where they took an old early 90s PC game from Bullfrog, or at least the name from that game, and tried to make a first-person shooter out of it. Now, I'm sure a lot of people were upset about the fact that this was in fact a first-person shooter, where the first one had an isometric style to it. But I was going to accept the first-person gameplay style. No, I don't think it should have been a first-person shooter, but I was going to keep an open mind. But that's not the only reason why it doesn't feel like a Syndicate game. And I could forgive it if they better met some of the other things that I think makes up the original. Weapon and gadget research, not just skill point upgrades. That's something the original had. You could research for new weapons and new gadgets and new upgrades for your characters to make them better. It wasn't just about finding a skill point upgrade. In this case, it's pulling a chip out of certain people's heads and then saying, I want that one. Then there was how you could choose your inventory for each mission. So in the original, you would load up your characters, up to 4 agents at a time, with different weapons and gadgets, and they might have different levels of upgrades in them, and you could change them for the next mission. Nothing like that for this game. Character selection. Sure, in the original there was nothing that really differentiated the characters. You did have men and women you could pick from, and you had a roster, I think it was like 10 or 20 different agents that you could use. And yeah, they all played the same in the original, but that's where we could have taken that aspect and made it better and expanded it out for this one. But no, in this one, for the single player campaign at least, you only play as the one guy. Mission selection. In the original, you have your first mission, and that's your first mission. But then as you spread over the globe, you get to pick different missions on the map as they connect to each other, so you could decide where you wanted to go next. Eventually, yeah, you had to do them all, but the order you did them in was a little more flexible, and that gave you the chance to maybe do the ones that you found easier earlier on, so that you could use your later, more advanced research weapons and gadgets for the other tougher missions. And mission variety is something that was better in the original. Yes, there were missions where you just went in and had to wipe out any other members of conflicting syndicates. Then there was also specific assassination missions. There was persuade missions where you had to get maybe a scientist from another syndicate over to your side. And then there was the other layer outside of the mission, the taxes. I know it seems like a simple thing, but what funded your research, what funded what weapons you went out there with, was the taxes you got as you went to the different areas on the map and gained control of countries, and how well you treated the residents, and then you could get tax money out of them and use it to do your research and fund your missions. The drugs. Where's the drugs in the new Syndicate? In the original, you had the options to give your Syndicate members drugs that would speed them up. I think there was another one to either increase their damage or make them more accurate. But then there was drawbacks too. They would get kind of immune to the effects of the drugs, so you had to balance things out. Maybe you had to give them a drug that would slow them down a little bit, that would bring down their immunity, so when you needed to give them the one that would speed them up, it would work better for longer. None of that in the new game. The world itself was a little more living and breathing too. It had more people walking around. Sure, you'd come across citizens in this game as well, but you always have your guns out, so they're always kind of hiding and ducking for cover from you. Whereas in the original, on your way to the objective, they were just kind of around. There was also cars, little vehicles you can get in. Sure, they pretty much all look the same, little half-egg things, but they were there. And the world itself was a little more open. Nothing compared to the way things are today. I mean, your choices were kind of, well, I could go head on, or I could come around from the left, or I could come around from the right. It wasn't a complicated idea, but it wasn't completely linear. Now, I don't mind linear games. My problem is not that it was linear. It's just when you think of the original, it's not too closed of an environment. I will give the new version some credit for use of weapons, as you do come across some of those special ones that made the original a lot of fun. Not that they're that unique nowadays, but they made sure to include them at least, like the minigun and the flamethrower. Now those two in particular are unique to limited areas in which you can use them, due to both the power of the weapons and the fact that there's no ammunition to run out of. It's unlimited ammo for those two. So it's a conscious level design decision as to why you can't use them in every level in the game, and I get it, and they're fun to use when they are there. But overall it does fall short as a Syndicate game. But what about just as a first-person shooter? Strip the Syndicate title away, and at least you have a competent first-person shooter that has its fun moments. Still nothing particularly innovative about it. Nothing that makes it say you have to play this one over another one, but still a good time. When I first started playing the game, I noticed it had that 2-weapon plus grenades system, which I don't really like in first-person shooter games. Okay, and yeah, I know, just to go back to the original, yeah, it gave you limited weapons you could hold as well when you were out and about. But when you looked at the whole picture, it felt more strategic at that time than the way it feels sometimes today in first-person shooters, like it's just a tick box option. Let's see, 2 guns or 10? Check the 2 box for this one. But as you get to the later levels, it really doesn't impede you that much. There's enough guys dropping different kinds of weapons and other weapons lying around where, sure, at any given time you can really only be holding 2 guns, but there's enough around for you to drop and pick up that you really get a chance to experience them all. And it's in those last few levels where you get the variety of weapons like the rail gun and the laser gun and have them more readily available. You also get what I was calling force powers that recharge based on how well you kill, but there's not a lot of variety. So you get an option to make another guy go on your side for a little bit. That one was kind of nice. There's also the option that does backfire where someone's weapon will do just that, backfire on them and stun them a little bit. And there's also the suicide option where you can make one person kill themselves, but it's with a grenade, so they'll do some damage around them as well. So helpful, nice to have, just not particularly innovative. And just because you call one of them Persuade, it's not enough to make me fall in love with it. I will say though, you are encouraged to use everything. They don't make you feel like you gotta hold on to these powers and save them up to only to use at special time. You also get upgrades for your character, and the way that setup works is you find a chip, you implant it, and you pick an upgrade. Things that will give you health boosts and damage boosts and better cooldown rates and those types of things. But the upgrades are nice, and I like how you don't have to worry about a tree. So you don't have good upgrades and bad upgrades, and if you start down one path you're kind of stuck with it. There's no starting at the top of a line and having to work your way down to all the good stuff at the bottom. They just give you a bunch of options, and you can pick which one you want. And given that you will not get them all by the end of the game, you can't really rely on a tree, and it lets you be strategic without feeling limited. Having the link option is nice too, so what happens is if you pick upgrades that are close to each other, they'll link together and give you other benefits as well. Which I thought was a neat feature, even if there doesn't feel to be a lot of connection between the connections. I didn't play co-op, which I think they wanted to be a big piece of this game, so I'm not sure how much it adds value to the rest of the game. Everything else is pretty standard, but it's confidently put together. And as an FPS, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, and there is some pew-pew fun to be had. But it is rather common and uninspired, with little to differentiate it from other FPS titles today. All that aside, it was still a nice diversion in my FPS library. I was able to find it pretty cheap, and I got my money's worth out of it at least. So if you can find it at a low price, and you like first-person shooters, you could do worse than picking this one up.